This happened around 8 or 9 months after I moved into my first house. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of college, and had landed a decent job. The only thing you really need to know about the house is that it had a very spacious basement, which I mostly used for storage. The previous owners had divided the basement into separate sections using plywood and exposed framing. There was the main area at the bottom of the stairs, then a laundry section, then what I assumed was meant to be a workshop, and finally this strange back room that was mostly just used for storage. The whole layout had a maze-like feel to it. You couldn't see the entire basement from any single spot, which I actually thought was pretty cool when I first toured the place. Anyway, it was a weeknight, and I needed to go downstairs to do laundry, which was pretty much the only reason I ever went down there. When I got to the top of the stairs, I noticed the basement lights were already on. I thought that was a bit strange, but for some reason, I didn't think too much of it. I had been down there a few days earlier, so I figured I probably just forgot to turn them off. Even with the lights on, the basement was still dim. I hadn't bothered replacing the old yellow incandescent bulbs that were already there when I moved in. I started walking down the stairs, and things escalated so quickly that I didn't even have time to react properly. I reached the bottom of the stairs and started heading toward the laundry area when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Instinctively, I turned my head and locked eyes with a man. He was crouching behind one of the folding tables I had set up near the far corner. The sight of him was so unsettling that I almost dropped the laundry basket. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. There was literally a stranger hiding in my basement. I froze. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at this intruder, who was now staring right back at me. And it was not a friendly stare. He looked like he had just crawled out of a sewer or something. Then suddenly, he stood up and ran. Not toward me, but deeper into the basement, heading into the partitioned rooms at the back. That snapped me out of my fear-induced freeze. I started backing up toward the basement stairs. But I must have hesitated for too long, because before I could reach them, all the lights in the basement suddenly went out. Up until that moment, I had never been down there with the lights off. I had no idea how dark it would actually be. It was completely pitch black. Total darkness. I foolishly assumed I knew my way around my own house, so I kept moving toward where I thought the stairs were. But I must have misjudged something, because I tripped and fell hard onto the floor. By the time I managed to get back up, I was completely disoriented. The fear and chaos of the situation overwhelmed my mind, and I couldn't think straight. My phone was upstairs on the counter, so I couldn't just pull it out and use the flashlight. In a panic, I started screaming, like a complete lunatic, hoping it might scare off whoever had broken into my house. But instead, it had the opposite effect. From somewhere in the darkness, I heard screaming back. It was coming from the other side of the basement. I was screaming into the void, trying to sound insane, hoping to intimidate whoever was there. And on the other side, someone was doing the exact same thing. Only his screams were far more terrifying than mine. He sounded like a murderer. I stopped screaming, and so did he. At that point, I had no choice but to move blindly. I started navigating through the basement using only my hands, feeling my way around in the darkness. Then I heard movement behind me. He must have been doing the same thing. The sounds were getting closer, and in the middle of all that fear, one thought hit me harder than anything else. It felt like he knew my basement better than I did. I could tell I was getting closer to the stairs, but the basement was huge. Then I started hearing breathing behind me. Close. Too close. At that moment, I genuinely believed he was going to catch me. Then finally, after what felt like forever, I felt the wooden base of the staircase. I grabbed onto the railing and started rushing up the stairs. But before I could even take a second step, something grabbed my ankle. I lost my balance instantly. My head slammed into the railing, and I fell all the way back down to the basement floor. I still couldn't see him, but I could feel him dragging me away from the stairs. And the strength he had, it didn't feel normal. It felt inhuman. I kicked wildly, thrashing my legs with everything I had. Somehow, I managed to hit something. That one strike was just enough. His grip loosened. I twisted my body desperately until I broke free. Then I ran, back toward the stairs, completely blind. Behind me, he started screaming again. But this time, I found the stairs before he could reach me. I rushed up, burst through the door at the top, and slammed it shut behind me. But it wasn't over. That door didn't have a lock, so I had no choice but to throw my full weight against it and hope I was strong enough to keep him out. Seconds later, I heard heavy footsteps charging up the basement stairs. Then a massive slam against the door. It flew open slightly for a split second, and it took everything I had to force it shut again. That first impact seemed to push him further. He started slamming into the door again and again. I ripped off my socks to get better grip and pushed with everything in me. I knew my life depended on it. I still don't know how he didn't break through, but eventually, he stopped. I heard footsteps running back down the basement stairs. That was my chance. I ran to the counter, grabbed my phone, and rushed back to the door, pressing myself against it again. Then I called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. Deep down, I already knew he would be. One of the basement windows had been forced open from the outside. It didn't take much to figure out how he got in, and how he escaped. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was missing. One of the officers suggested that the intruder might have been using my basement as a place to hide or live. That thought had never crossed my mind before. But somehow, it was even worse than the idea of him breaking in to rob me. Another reason they believed that was because he knew exactly where the light switch was, and it wasn't in an obvious place. That meant he had been down there before, maybe more than once. I ended up moving out about 4 months after that night. And thinking back on it now, one thing is absolutely clear to me. That man was fully prepared to kill me. And if things had gone even slightly differently, he probably would have. This happened when I was 14. I'm in my 30s now, so we're talking close to 20 years ago at this point. My parents had to drive out of state for a wedding, and they didn't want to leave me alone, even though I was technically at the age where I could stay home by myself. So, the original plan was for my older sister to stay with me for the weekend. She was already in college at the time, but she only lived about an hour away. However, as soon as my parents left, she texted me saying she had some party to go to and wasn't going to come. I didn't really care. I didn't even bother telling my parents about it, partly because I didn't want to stress them out, and partly because I didn't want them finding someone else to watch me. It wasn't like the house was in a bad area either. It was a normal 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, mostly filled with families. I felt completely safe. The evening itself was totally uneventful. I played Halo for about 6 hours straight, something I'd normally never get to do. It wasn't until just after midnight that things started getting weird. I was still laying on the couch when I heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from somewhere in the backyard. At first, I assumed it was just something hitting the side of the house. That's exactly what it sounded like, so I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, I heard it again. The sound was almost identical, which made me think it was probably a tree branch hitting the same spot. But then, the tapping started moving. It sounded like whatever was making it was traveling along the side of the house. That's when I knew something wasn't right. The sound felt too deliberate, too intentional to be something random. I muted the TV and froze. I didn't want to move. I just sat there listening. Then silence. After about a minute, I convinced myself it had just been an animal or the wind, so I turned the TV back on. About 20 minutes later, a new sound started, and this one was worse. It was another tapping noise, but this time, it was coming from below me, from the basement. The living room was directly above it, so there was no doubt where the sound was coming from. The basement wasn't finished, but there was a small kitchenette down there, so it wasn't impossible to imagine some animal getting in and making noise. Still, something didn't feel right. I muted the TV again and stood up. I didn't want to check, but I felt like I had to. The basement had a few windows that led outside, so I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the same raccoon or stray cat from earlier had gotten down there and was messing around near one of the windows. Trying to stay calm, I walked over to the basement door. I opened it and stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into complete darkness. The tapping was louder now, and it was happening every few seconds. For some reason, I called out, "Hello." The tapping stopped instantly. That's when the fear really hit me. If it had been an animal, it probably wouldn't have reacted like that. I thought about turning on the light, but the switch was at the bottom of the stairs, and there was no way I was going down there. So instead, I slowly pushed the door almost shut, leaving just a small gap. I stuck my hand through, holding my phone out toward where I knew one of the windows was. I closed my eyes and recorded a short video with the flash on. Then I quickly pulled my hand back, shut the door, and locked it. I stood there for a second, trying to steady my breathing, then opened the video. It was grainy, but it only took 1 second to see it. There was a figure standing inside the basement, directly beneath one of the windows. I screamed. I couldn't stop myself. I ran straight to my room, locked the door, and immediately called my dad. He called the police while staying on the phone with me. And then I heard it. Loud banging, coming from the basement door. Whoever was down there was trying to break into the rest of the house. The banging happened again, and again. After the fifth or sixth hit, it suddenly stopped. Then, not long after, the police arrived. They searched the basement, but the person had already escaped through one of the windows. The officers were kind enough to search the yard too, but whoever it was, they were long gone. There were a bunch of things missing from the basement. It wasn't a finished space, but it still had plenty of stored items. I don't remember everything that was taken, but the scariest part was this. When the police checked the kitchenette, they found that the biggest knife from the rack was missing. That thought still terrifies me. If I hadn't recorded that video, I don't think the police would have taken the situation as seriously as they did. But in the end, nothing ever came of it. That was almost 20 years ago now. I have no idea what happened to that phone. It's probably sitting somewhere in a box at my parents' house, if it even still exists. But if I ever find it, and it still turns on, I'll submit the footage.